In the world of science, there are those who discover, those who explain, and those rare few who can make the act of discovery feel like a shared human experience. Richard Feynman belonged to that rare breed. His ability to simplify complex ideas was not just a talent, it was an art, a philosophy, a way of seeing the universe. For Feynman, understanding something deeply meant being able to express it in plain, human language without stripping away its wonder. He believed that complexity was no excuse for confusion. If nature could express its beauty through simple patterns, then surely a scientist could too. Imagine him standing before a classroom, a piece of chalk in hand, sleeves rolled up, eyes gleaming with curiosity. His voice would rise and fall, not like a lecturer's, but like a storyteller's. To his students, it often felt as though he wasn't teaching physics at all. He was pulling back the curtain of reality itself, showing how everything, from the flicker of light to the hum of an atom, danced to the same cosmic rhythm. The blackboard behind him became a living map of ideas, each line of chalk carrying both precision and playfulness. Feynman's genius lay not just in understanding the mathematics of the universe, but in knowing how to translate it into pictures, metaphors, and laughter. He once said that if you can't explain something simply, you don't really understand it. To him, understanding was not a privilege for the few, it was an open door for anyone curious enough to knock. He could describe the quantum behavior of particles using analogies so vivid that even a child could grasp the essence. He compared light to bouncing bullets, or waves moving through crowds, or even to ripples in a pond. These images turned abstract equations into living experiences, and that was his power. But the secret to his simplicity came from something deeper than clever analogies. It came from the way he thought about thinking itself. Feynman had a habit of breaking every problem down to its bare essentials. He called this his first principle thinking. Instead of memorizing formulas or relying on authority, he started from scratch, asking, "What do we really know? What can we see, measure, or test?" He once said, "What I cannot create, I do not understand." Create. He meant rebuilding an idea from the ground up, with his own reasoning, his own curiosity. This mental habit made him both an extraordinary scientist and an extraordinary teacher. To watch Feynman explain something was to see pure joy in motion. He never hid behind technical terms. Instead, he wielded them like tools, not weapons. In a world where many intellectuals used complexity to impress, Feynman used simplicity to connect. He had no patience for pretentiousness. He famously mocked jargon-filled lectures, saying that if an explanation couldn't make sense to a bright high schooler, it probably wasn't clear at all. His approach was not to make things easier by watering them down, but to make them clearer by revealing the essence that lay beneath the confusion. One of his favorite teaching techniques was the use of what he called Feynman diagrams. These simple sketches of particles interacting, lines and arrows on paper, revolutionized the way physicists visualized quantum electrodynamics. What had once been buried in pages of complex equations could now be seen at a glance. Each line represented a particle's motion, each vertex an interaction. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like doodling. But to the scientific world, it was a stroke of genius, a way to see the invisible. The diagrams were more than a convenience, they were a language, a universal shorthand that captured the dance of nature with elegance and simplicity. Through these diagrams, Feynman didn't just simplify science, he gave it a new voice. His clarity was born from honesty. He never pretended to know more than he did, and he wasn't afraid to admit confusion. He often laughed at his own mistakes, using them as stepping stones to deeper understanding. He once said, "I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned." That spirit of humility and wonder gave his explanations their authenticity. His students saw not just a physicist, but a human being genuinely in love with learning. His simplicity came not from trying to appear smart, but from wanting to truly understand. Feynman's teaching style was also deeply rooted in curiosity about how people learn. He used to test his own understanding by explaining a concept to an imaginary audience, often a child. If he stumbled or felt the explanation getting heavy, he knew he didn't yet understand it well enough. This became known as the Feynman technique, now used across the world as a method for mastering any subject. The idea is deceptively simple. If you can teach it clearly, you understand it deeply. If you can't, go back and learn again. This method reflects Feynman's belief that clarity is the final proof of understanding. His own curiosity was endless. He didn't separate art from science or play from work. Once, while visiting a friend's art studio, he became fascinated by the colors and shadows on the canvas. He began studying how light interacts with surfaces, leading him to new insights about optics and perception. When someone asked why he was wasting time with painting, he smiled and said, "It's not a waste. It's all nature. It's all connected." To Feynman, every act of curiosity was an act of science. Every simple question, "Why does this happen? How does that work?" could open a door to deeper truth. In his lectures, he often used humor as a tool for understanding. He would joke about the strange behavior of electrons or tease his audience with paradoxes that made them think harder. Laughter, for Feynman, was not just entertainment, it was education. It disarmed confusion and opened the mind to insight. When people laughed, they relaxed. When they relaxed, they learned. His joy became contagious. He showed that science didn't have to be solemn to be serious. You could respect the mystery of the universe and still have fun exploring it. He brought this spirit to everything he did, from his public lectures to his famous interviews. In one of his most memorable talks, he explained the difference between knowing the name of something and truly understanding it. "You can know the name of a bird in all the languages of the world," he said, "but when you're finished, you'll know absolutely nothing about the bird." That simple line captures his entire philosophy. Knowledge is not memorization, it is comprehension. True learning means seeing the connections, feeling the patterns, and asking the next question. The simplicity of Feynman's explanations also came from his respect for the audience. He never looked down on anyone for not knowing. Instead, he shared in their curiosity. He believed that everyone could appreciate the beauty of science if given the right invitation. When he explained why magnets repel or how atoms interact, he didn't overwhelm his listeners with equations. He painted pictures with words. It's like asking why two people who love each other hold hands. He once said, when pressed to explain magnetism's deepest cause, "It just is." The deeper explanation lies in the laws of physics, and those laws are what we discover step by step. He taught that not knowing everything was part of the joy of discovery. Even outside the classroom, Feynman's simplicity shone through. During the investigation of the Challenger space shuttle disaster, he demonstrated the cause of the tragedy on live television using nothing more than a piece of rubber O-ring and a glass of ice water. As millions watched, he dipped the rubber into the cold water, showing how it lost flexibility, proving that the freezing temperatures had caused the shuttle's failure. In that moment, without any scientific jargon, he turned a national tragedy into a moment of clear, undeniable understanding. The whole world saw what he meant when he said, "For a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations." His ability to simplify complex ideas wasn't limited to science. It was how he approached life itself. He saw complexity as an illusion, a layer built by people trying to appear wise. The truth, he believed, was usually simple once you looked at it honestly. He distrusted grand theories that couldn't be tested or explained clearly. He sought direct contact with reality, the kind that comes from experimentation, from doing, from playing. That's why he loved tinkering with radios as a boy and disassembling gadgets just to see how they worked. For him, learning was not about reading manuals, it was about touching the world and feeling how it responds. His simplicity was also philosophical. He believed that nature speaks in the language of mathematics, but that language could be translated into human imagination. He once compared science to poetry. Both, he said, are ways of describing the beauty of the world. When he looked at a flower, he didn't see less beauty because he understood it scientifically. He saw more. He saw the cellular structure, the light reflection, the chemistry of its color, and the biology of its life. To him, science added layers of meaning to the wonder. The science knowledge only adds to the excitement, the mystery, and the awe of a flower, he said. It only adds. I don't understand how it subtracts. This view shaped his approach to communication. He believed that science was not about impressing others with complexity, but about sharing joy. Each time he spoke, his excitement was palpable. It was as though he was discovering the idea again, right there, with his audience. That energy broke down barriers between expert and learner. People didn't feel lectured to, they felt included. He made them feel smart. That was the true magic of his simplicity. The reason Feynman could make things simple was that he didn't just know facts. He understood meaning. He saw patterns where others saw chaos. He knew that behind every complicated equation was a simple story about how the universe behaves. And stories are what people understand best. His genius was not only in what he knew, but in how he could reimagine knowledge as a story anyone could follow. He could make an electron feel like a character with personality, a photon like a mischievous spark of light. This narrative style bridged the gap between mathematics and imagination. Even today, decades after his death, his lectures continue to inspire millions online. Students and enthusiasts still marvel at how clearly he spoke, how his explanations still feel fresh. The world has changed, but his voice remains timeless. It's the voice of someone who believes that knowledge should never be a secret, that learning should always be joyful. He made physics, one of the most complex sciences, feel like a story you could live inside. And perhaps that is the heart of his simplicity, empathy. He remembered what it felt like not to understand. He remembered the frustration of confusion and the thrill of finally getting it. So he never taught from above, he taught from beside you, as if both of you were exploring together. That human warmth turned his lectures into something more than lessons. They became adventures. Every concept, no matter how abstract, became a shared journey of discovery. To Feynman, science was not just equations, it was the poetry of reality. And poetry, when true, is always simple. That is why his words still resonate. Because simplicity, in the hands of a genius, is not the absence of depth, it is the purest expression of it. Through laughter, curiosity, and honesty, Richard Feynman turned complexity into clarity and learning into joy. His legacy is a reminder that simplicity is not the enemy of knowledge, it is its truest form. When the camera of time moves further into Richard Feynman's story, it becomes clear that simplicity for him was not only a method, it was a moral stance. He saw confusion as a barrier between people and truth, a barrier that could be torn down if one dared to look with fresh eyes. For him, the universe was not built to be hidden behind walls of jargon. It was open, bright, and waiting to be understood by anyone brave enough to ask. His mission was not to prove that he was clever, but to prove that nature was elegant. In the quiet of his study or the noise of his classroom, Feynman carried the same spark curiosity. He never lost the childlike wonder that drives all true scientists. When he looked at a problem, he didn't see equations first, he saw patterns of movement, imagined tiny objects swirling in the void. In his mind, atoms were alive, electrons danced, and light was a mischievous messenger darting through space. This visual imagination gave him a rare gift. He could think in pictures, not just in symbols. When he spoke, those pictures came alive for others too. People who listened to him could almost see what he saw. The invisible world painted in strokes of energy and rhythm. It's said that Feynman once visualized electrons as tiny particles bouncing off one another like billiard balls, and at other times as waves overlapping in a symphony of interference. Instead of forcing students to accept formulas, He invited them to play with mental images. He turned physics into a language of imagination, and that made it simple. Simplicity, for him, was not reducing truth. It was revealing it in its most natural form. He never separated understanding from beauty. To him, a clear explanation was beautiful because it was honest, and honesty was the purest form of science. The world first saw this power of clarity in full form during his work on quantum electrodynamics. Many physicists had tried to describe how light and matter interact, but their equations were tangled, abstract, and nearly impossible to visualize. Feynman entered the scene like an artist walking into a maze with a sketchpad. Out of that complexity, he drew the famous Feynman diagrams, simple arrows and lines that captured the behavior of the smallest particles. What was once a storm of equations now looked like a simple dance on paper. Each arrow carried meaning, each meeting point told a story. Physicists everywhere adopted his notation, not just because it was easier, but because it was right. It captured truth in a way both rigorous and graceful. In doing so, Feynman didn't merely simplify physics, he changed the way it was thought about. His diagrams were visual poetry. They carried within them a philosophy, that even the deepest truths of the universe can be expressed in pictures that anyone can grasp with patience and curiosity. He used to say, "The joy of understanding something simple that nobody understood before, that's the greatest joy there is." To him, simplicity was not about cutting corners, but about arriving at that moment of clarity where the fog of confusion lifts, and the world suddenly makes sense. When he spoke to non-scientific audiences, he didn't hide the complexity of the universe, he revealed its structure piece by piece, letting wonder grow naturally. In his famous television interviews, he explained atomic energy, quantum uncertainty, and the laws of nature with the rhythm of a storyteller, not the stiffness of a lecturer. His laughter filled the pauses between deep truths. He didn't demand reverence from his listeners, he invited them to laugh with him at the absurd beauty of reality. That laugh became a symbol of his teaching, the sound of joy meeting intellect. He once told a story about being asked to describe the motion of planets. Instead of quoting Newton's laws, he began with something familiar, a ball swung on a string. He explained how the tension, the speed, and the curve of motion could describe the very same principles that governed the cosmos. In one gesture, he connected playground physics to celestial mechanics. His audience could see it, they could feel it. That was his genius, to make the cosmic feel personal. In classrooms, he was unpredictable, full of energy and humor. Students said he could take an equation that looked terrifying and, within minutes, turn it into something clear and joyful. He used metaphors like a musician uses notes, rhythmically, precisely, emotionally. He compared quantum jumps to leaps of faith, electrons to players in a game who follow strange but consistent rules. These comparisons weren't trivial. They opened the door for intuition. He gave people mental tools to feel what the equations meant. Once you felt it, you could never unsee it. His simplicity was also an act of rebellion. Feynman grew up in an era when scientific prestige often came with arrogance. Many scientists guarded their discoveries behind walls of technical vocabulary. Feynman refused to play that game. He mocked pretension wherever he saw it, in academia, in politics, in bureaucracy. He believed that real understanding had no need for pomp. If something was true, it could be explained simply. And if it couldn't be explained simply, perhaps it wasn't truly understood. This honesty made him controversial to some but beloved by many more. He reminded the scientific world of its original purpose, not to impress, but to illuminate. There is an almost cinematic beauty in imagining Feynman late at night, chalk dust on his hands, a blackboard covered in half-erased equations, his face lit by the joy of discovery. He would pace the room, muttering to himself, testing an idea out loud, challenging his own understanding. To anyone watching, it might have seemed chaotic, but inside his mind it was order forming from chaos. He wasn't simplifying for others yet. He was simplifying for himself, breaking the idea until it became clear, alive, and whole. Only when he reached that clarity would he teach it, confident that anyone could follow. That inner discipline, the insistence on clarity before communication, is what made his explanations unforgettable. When Feynman visited other universities to lecture, people from all disciplines came to listen. Not just physicists, but artists, writers, and philosophers. They came because he had something rare, the ability to make the invisible visible. His voice carried both the authority of knowledge and the humility of wonder. He never claimed to have all the answers, he just wanted to share the thrill of the chase. As he spoke, the universe didn't feel distant or abstract. It felt like a living story unfolding in front of your eyes. Even in his public talks, he spoke as though he were sitting across from you at a cafe, sketching ideas on a napkin. He would draw a simple diagram, pause, grin, and say, "Now isn't that neat?" And it was. Because in that moment, the complex machinery of the universe became something you could hold in your imagination. His simplicity was a form of generosity, a gift of understanding. One of the most remarkable things about Feynman's way of simplifying was that he never made you feel small for not knowing. He made you feel big for wanting to know. He never turned his lectures into performances of superiority. He turned them into celebrations of curiosity. He reminded people that ignorance was not a shameful state. It was the starting point of wisdom. "I can live with doubt and uncertainty," he said. "I think it's much more interesting to live the not knowing than to have answers that might be wrong." This acceptance of not knowing made his teaching free from ego and full of life. It allowed his listeners to feel safe being curious, safe admitting confusion, safe asking questions. That emotional openness was part of his simplicity, because true simplicity requires courage, the courage to let go of complexity as a shield. Feynman was fearless in that way. He stripped away the unnecessary, even when it made him vulnerable. He admitted when he didn't understand something, and in doing so, he taught everyone around him that curiosity is stronger than pride. Feynman's simplicity extended beyond science into how he lived. He found joy in ordinary things, playing his bongos, sketching people on the beach, tinkering with broken radios. He once described watching ants march along his sink and trying to figure out their communication method by gently interfering with their trail. What others would dismiss as trivial, he saw as an experiment, a doorway to understanding behavior, order, and chaos. His curiosity democratized knowledge. He proved that science was not confined to laboratories, but was woven into daily life. Even his failures became lessons in clarity. When he struggled with the math of a problem, he didn't hide it. He would dissect his own confusion publicly, showing how wrong turns lead to insight. He taught students that simplicity isn't born from perfection. It's carved out of struggle. By watching him wrestle with ideas, others learned not just science but the process of thinking clearly. That process, open, honest, playful, became his true legacy. When the Nobel Prize was awarded to him in 1965, he accepted it with his usual modesty. The recognition was for his contributions to quantum electrodynamics, but when reporters asked how he felt, he joked that the ceremony interfered with his teaching schedule. Beneath the humor was a truth. What mattered most to him wasn't the prize but the joy of explaining. He didn't crave recognition, he craved clarity. In his later years, when illness began to slow him down, he continued to teach, to question, to simplify. Even as his body weakened, his curiosity never dimmed. In one of his final interviews, he reflected on death with the same candor he brought to physics. "I want to find out more about it," he said softly. "It's one of the great mysteries, isn't it?" His simplicity was there until the end, an openness to reality in whatever form it took. Today, when we revisit his lectures, the magic still works. The words are decades old, the chalkboard long erased, but the spirit remains. A new generation of learners watches him speak and feels that same spark. The feeling that knowledge is within reach, that the universe is friendly if you approach it with curiosity and honesty. That is the mark of true simplicity. It endures. Feynman's way of simplifying complex ideas changed not just how science was taught, but how it was perceived. He showed that learning is not about memorizing facts, but about building intuition. He reminded the world that curiosity is a universal language, that even the most advanced theories can be explained with joy, and that the purpose of science is not to intimidate, but to inspire. When we look back at him now, standing before a blackboard, grinning, gesturing, his chalk dancing like a magician's wand, we see more than a physicist. We see a bridge between worlds, between the known and the unknown, between the mind and the heart, between complexity and clarity. His life teaches us that the highest form of intelligence is not complication, but simplicity born of deep understanding. In every generation, there are teachers who make you believe in the power of learning again. Richard Feynman was one of those rare souls. He showed that simplicity is not the opposite of sophistication. It is its crown. It takes courage to strip away layers until only truth remains. And it takes love to share that truth with others in a way they can feel. As his laughter fades into memory and his diagrams remain in textbooks, his voice still whispers through the halls of science, keep it simple, keep it honest, keep it fun. That is how you make the universe your friend. That is how Richard Feynman turned complexity into joy, and how he made the world understand that the greatest minds are not those who make things difficult, but those who make them beautifully clear. When you look at the life of Richard Feynman, one thing becomes unmistakably clear. He wasn't just a man who studied the universe, he was a man who loved sharing its beauty. Teaching for him wasn't a duty or a profession. It was a form of art. It was how he connected his soul with the world. Feynman's passion for teaching was a reflection of his boundless curiosity. The same force that drove him to explore atoms and galaxies also drove him to ignite that same wonder in others. To him, curiosity was not a trait that some people had and others lacked. It was the natural state of the human mind, waiting to be reawakened. Every time he walked into a lecture hall, he brought with him the energy of a performer, the curiosity of a child, and the wisdom of a philosopher. Students didn't just listen to his lectures, they experienced them. The way he spoke, the way he moved, the way he laughed, it all came together like a living performance. He wasn't interested in formality or perfection, he was interested in truth, in discovery, in making the complex feel alive. The walls of the classroom disappeared as his words carried his audience into the heart of the universe itself. To understand Feynman's passion for teaching, one must understand how he saw learning. He once said, "The purpose of teaching is not to prepare students for exams, but to prepare them for life." He believed that education was not about passing information from one head to another. It was about sparking the flame of curiosity so bright that it would burn forever. Feynman knew that curiosity is fragile. In schools and systems that reward memorization, curiosity often dies young. But Feynman fought against that. He wanted people to feel the joy of asking questions, not the fear of being wrong. He believed that curiosity was the beginning of intelligence. "I would rather have questions that can't be answered," he said, "than answers that can't be questioned." That sentence became the essence of his teaching style. His classroom was not a place where certainty lived, it was a place where doubt was welcome. He made confusion sacred because to him, confusion was the first step toward understanding. Students who sat before him didn't feel small for not knowing, they felt empowered to explore. His lectures became journeys, not just lessons. He often told stories to his students, stories from his childhood, from his time at Los Alamos, from his endless experiments with radios and ants and drawings. These stories weren't distractions, they were his way of teaching curiosity. He showed that the same principles of exploration apply to everything, from fixing a broken circuit to unlocking the mysteries of the quantum world. To Feynman, science wasn't confined to laboratories or textbooks, it was everywhere. The way water swirls down a drain, the pattern of shadows on a wall, the sound of drums, everything was an invitation to wonder. When he was young, his father played a vital role in shaping this love for curiosity. Melville Feynman was a man of simple means, but deep insight. He would take young Richard on long walks, pointing at the stars, the trees, the birds. When he told his son the name of a bird, he would add, "You can learn all the names in all the languages, but that won't tell you anything about the bird. What's important is to notice what it's doing." That simple lesson stayed with Feynman forever, that knowing the name of something is not the same as understanding it. This early influence built the foundation for the teacher he would later become. As he grew older and entered the world of academia, he carried this philosophy like a torch. He never saw students as vessels to be filled with knowledge, he saw them as explorers in training. His job, he believed, was not to show them what to think, but how to think. He encouraged them to question everything, even him. He would challenge his own students to catch his mistakes, and when they did, he would laugh, delighted that they were thinking for themselves. That humility made him different. It broke the traditional wall between teacher and learner. In his classroom, everyone was a student, including Feynman himself. When he gave the now famous Feynman lectures on physics at Caltech in the early 1960s, his passion reached a new peak. The lectures were not ordinary physics classes, they were performances of wonder. Standing before hundreds of students, chalk in hand, he would weave equations into stories and turn mathematical abstractions into vivid pictures. The audience would sit spellbound, not because the topics were simple, but because Feynman made them feel simple. He made them human. He believed that the goal of teaching was not to make students memorize formulas, but to make them see the poetry in those formulas, to see how they described the dance of light, the hum of energy, the heartbeat of the cosmos. One of the reasons Feynman's teaching connected so deeply was because he taught with emotion. He didn't just say that the laws of physics were beautiful. He showed it in the way he spoke, in the light of his eyes. His passion was contagious. Students left his lectures not only understanding more but feeling more. He gave them permission to be amazed. In a world where science can sometimes feel cold or mechanical, Feynman made it warm, alive, and profoundly human. He often compared learning to playing a game with nature. "You find out the rules," he said, "by playing the game." For him, teaching was about helping others learn how to play, how to observe, test, fail, and try again. That playful spirit defined his entire approach. He didn't believe in teaching through fear or authority. He taught through laughter, stories, and challenges. His lessons felt less like instructions and more like adventures. There's a story from his time at Caltech that perfectly captures this. A student once came to him frustrated, saying he couldn't understand quantum mechanics, no matter how hard he studied. Feynman smiled and said, "That makes two of us." The student looked shocked. But Feynman explained, "Nobody really understands quantum mechanics. The point isn't to memorize it, it's to learn to think about it." That one sentence lifted the student's burden instantly. It showed that learning was not about pretending to know everything. It was about learning to be comfortable with mystery. Feynman's curiosity was not just intellectual, it was emotional. He cared deeply about the joy of discovery. When he explained something new, you could see the sparkle in his eyes, as if he were discovering it for the first time himself. His excitement was so genuine that it broke down all barriers of formality. Students would find themselves smiling, laughing, even applauding during his lectures. They weren't responding to entertainment. They were responding to truth delivered with passion. But perhaps what made Feynman's teaching so powerful was his belief that curiosity was the essence of being human. He believed that every child is born a scientist, always touching, tasting, testing. The tragedy, he said, is that most people lose that curiosity as they grow older. Schools, systems, and social pressures teach us to stop asking, why? Feynman's life was a rebellion against that loss. He wanted everyone to reclaim their natural curiosity. In one of his interviews, he said, "I'm happy because I'm interested in everything." That statement wasn't arrogance, it was the simplicity of someone who had never stopped being amazed by the world. To him, curiosity was freedom. It meant never being bored, never being trapped in the limits of your own understanding. It meant that life could always surprise you. He once described the difference between knowing and discovering. When you know something, you're sure. When you're discovering, you're alive. That was the heartbeat of his teaching, keeping people alive to the thrill of discovery. Even outside formal classrooms, Feynman's teaching spirit thrived. He could turn a casual conversation into a lesson in curiosity. Whether he was fixing a radio, drawing a portrait, or playing his bongos, he would explain the physics behind everything. He never separated fun from learning. Once, while visiting Brazil, he observed how students could recite formulas perfectly, but didn't know how to apply them to real life. He gave a famous talk there, warning against what he called cargo cult education, teaching that looks right on the surface but lacks real understanding. He urged teachers to make students think, to make them curious about why things happen, not just what happens. It was a passionate plea for honesty in education, a call to bring back curiosity as the foundation of learning. Feynman's classroom was not bound by walls. He taught on beaches, in cafeterias, at parties, anywhere curiosity appeared. Once, a group of students caught him at lunch and asked a question about the behavior of light. Instead of giving a short answer, he pulled out a napkin and began drawing diagrams, explaining reflections and refractions, as if the whole restaurant had become his lecture hall. People nearby stopped eating just to listen. That was Feynman, always teaching, always exploring, always alive to wonder. His passion for teaching wasn't about recognition, it was about sharing joy. When asked why he spent so much time explaining things to the public when he could have been doing research, he replied, "Because it's fun." That simple word carried the weight of his philosophy. He believed that when teaching becomes joyful, learning becomes effortless. Fun was not the opposite of seriousness, it was the expression of true engagement. In every student he met, Feynman tried to awaken that spark, the sense that the world was full of puzzles waiting to be solved. He wasn't impressed by grades or titles, he was impressed by curiosity. He once told a student, "The only thing that really matters is whether you can find something interesting and go after it." That single idea guided his entire approach. Whether it was physics, art, or playing the drums, curiosity was the bridge between the unknown and the known. He never saw teaching as one-directional. For him, it was an exchange of energy. His students taught him as much as he taught them, about how people think, how confusion arises, how clarity feels. He would later use those insights to make his explanations even simpler. Each time he taught, he improved. Each question from a student was not a challenge to his authority, but an opportunity for him to see the world in a new way. This humility kept him growing long after most people would have settled into expertise. Perhaps the greatest lesson he gave his students was this, that curiosity is not something you practice only in science. It is a way of life. To be curious is to be awake, to be human, to never stop learning. In a world filled with answers, Feynman reminded us of the power of questions. He lived his life as if the universe were a great puzzle, and every day offered another piece. That sense of wonder made his teaching timeless. And so, when we imagine him now, standing before a class, eyes bright, voice full of humor, we can almost hear the pulse of that passion. It wasn't just physics he was teaching. It was how to feel the joy of learning itself. He made people believe that curiosity wasn't something to outgrow, it was something to protect. He made teaching a form of love. Love for knowledge, love for questions, love for the infinite beauty of not yet knowing. As Richard Feynman continued his career, his classroom became less of a formal learning environment and more of a playground of ideas. Students didn't just attend his lectures to memorize equations, they came to witness a man in love with discovery. When he spoke, his eyes sparkled, His hands moved with rhythm, and his words painted invisible pictures of atomic dances and cosmic symphonies. Each lesson felt like a story unfolding, not a formula being dictated. The energy in the room was different, it was alive. His enthusiasm was magnetic, drawing students into the heart of physics, making even the toughest subjects seem like riddles waiting to be solved. For Feynman, teaching was not about authority, it was about shared wonder. He had an uncanny ability to make students feel that they were learning alongside him, not beneath him. Feynman never lectured as someone above his audience. He spoke as a friend who wanted to share something incredible he had just discovered. He believed that knowledge was not meant to be hoarded but spread, and the joy of understanding multiplied when shared. His lectures at Caltech were filled with laughter, questions, and moments of silence that made people think deeply. In those pauses, students could feel the weight of a mystery, and then the thrill of unraveling it together. He would often tell them that confusion was the beginning of knowledge. To him, being confused was not a weakness. It was a sign you were truly thinking. The heart of Feynman's teaching philosophy was that curiosity had no boundaries. Whether he was explaining the motion of a wobbling plate or the strange behavior of particles, his approach always began with, "Let's find out." That simple phrase captured his entire view of education. He wanted his students to feel the excitement of not knowing, to chase questions without fear. He understood that real curiosity thrives in freedom, not in rigid systems of grades or memorization. He often criticized how education sometimes suffocated imagination, how students were trained to answer rather than to ask. To him, the goal was not to produce experts who could recite facts, but thinkers who could explore ideas from every angle. Outside the classroom, Feynman's curiosity was boundless. He learned to play the bongo drums, studied art, and even experimented with luck, picking just to understand how things worked. He never saw learning as belonging to one field or one purpose. This playful curiosity was something he wanted others to feel, that every question, no matter how small, was worth exploring. He used his own life as proof that curiosity could make existence richer. He once said, "I was born not knowing, and have only had a little time to change that here and there." That humble statement reflected his belief that learning was an endless journey, one that could never truly be finished, but could always be enjoyed. His passion for teaching wasn't confined to the walls of academia. When he served on the committee investigating the Challenger space shuttle disaster, he turned a tragic event into a teachable moment for the world. In a televised hearing, he dropped a piece of rubber O-ring into a glass of ice water to demonstrate how it became brittle in cold temperatures, revealing, in seconds, what thousands of words could not. It was classic Feynman, simple, clear, and deeply human. He didn't just explain science, he revealed truth with honesty and directness. Even under pressure, his love for clarity triumphed. His goal was never to show off intellect, but to ensure that everyone watching could understand. His students often recalled that being in his presence felt like being close to a living spark. He could ignite the dullest minds with a single sentence. "What do you care what other people think?" he once told them, not as a phrase of arrogance, but as a call to intellectual freedom. He encouraged them to think independently, to test everything, and to never accept something just because it was written in a book. For Feynman, knowledge without questioning was lifeless. The essence of learning was rebellion, not against teachers, but against ignorance. Every experiment, every question, was an act of defiance against the limits of understanding. Feynman's passion for teaching was also an act of generosity. He gave his time, his thoughts, and his energy freely. When he explained something, you could feel that he truly cared about whether you understood. He didn't teach to impress, he taught to connect. He once described teaching as the greatest joy of physics, saying that through explaining something, he understood it even more deeply himself. This reflection showed that his teaching was not a duty, it was a dialogue. He learned from his students, just as much as they learned from him. The classroom, for him, was a laboratory of minds, a place where the joy of discovery was shared equally between teacher and student. Even in his final years, as illness began to slow him down, his enthusiasm never faded. When asked why he continued to teach and explore despite his health struggles, he simply smiled and said, "Because there's still so much to find out." His words reflected a lifelong hunger for understanding, one that no obstacle could extinguish. His lectures became quieter but never dull, his eyes still carried that familiar light of curiosity. He had spent his life proving that science was not only a field of study, but a celebration of the human spirit, our endless urge to question, to discover, and to marvel. Today, when we listen to his recorded lectures or read his books, we still feel that spark. His voice carries warmth, wit, and clarity that transcend generations. Modern science communicators, educators, and even YouTubers who make complex topics accessible owe much to Feynman's influence. He showed the world that teaching could be storytelling, that knowledge could be play, and that curiosity was the most powerful force in learning. His legacy is not just in the equations that bear his name, but in the countless minds he inspired to look up at the stars, to ask why, and to never lose that childlike wonder for how things work. In the end, Richard Feynman did more than teach physics. He taught a way of seeing. He reminded the world that science is not a cold pursuit of facts but a vibrant, joyful dance with reality. His passion for teaching turned countless students into explorers, and his love for curiosity continues to echo through every curious soul who dares to wonder. Through him, learning became an adventure, teaching became an art, and science became, forever, fun for everyone. When the Feynman lectures on physics were first delivered at the California Institute of Technology in the early 1960s, they were more than just lessons. They were a revolution in how science could be taught. The lecture hall filled each morning with an eager crowd of students, professors, and sometimes even visiting scientists, all drawn by the magnetic presence of one man, Richard Feynman. His voice carried not the stiffness of academia, but the rhythm of curiosity and life. Each lecture began not with formulas, but with wonder, not with definitions, but with questions. He did not merely speak to inform, he spoke to awaken. The young minds who sat before him didn't just hear about physics. They felt it. They lived it. The world of physics at the time was heavy with complexity. Quantum mechanics, electromagnetism, and relativity were taught through dense equations that seemed almost designed to discourage newcomers. Yet Feynman walked into that space and did something astonishing. He made it simple without making it shallow. He took the same topics that confused even experienced scientists and reshaped them into stories filled with intuition and imagination. The Feynman lectures on physics were not built to feed facts. They were designed to feed curiosity. His words became windows, revealing how nature truly worked, and for the first time, students felt that science was not a distant intellectual pursuit, but a deeply human adventure. In these lectures, Feynman built a bridge between mathematics and meaning. He would draw diagrams, sketch little circles and waves, and laugh as he explained why nature behaves in ways that seem bizarre, but make perfect sense when seen from the right perspective. When he talked about light, it was not as a dry topic. It was as if light itself was a living, dancing entity that spoke its own mysterious language. He could describe an electron as though it were a mischievous character in a story, darting here and there, uncertain yet predictable in its own strange way. Through his voice, invisible worlds became visible, and abstract theories took on the color and texture of real life. Each session of his lectures was a performance. Feynman moved with energy, pacing, gesturing, and drawing on the board as if he were painting a masterpiece. His students were not passive observers. They were participants in a shared discovery. The sound of chalk against the board was like a heartbeat that matched the pulse of curiosity in the room. Feynman's humor kept the atmosphere light, but beneath the laughter lay a deep respect for truth. He wanted his students to feel that learning physics wasn't about worshipping equations. It was about understanding nature at its most profound. He once said, "What I cannot create, I do not understand," a reflection of his belief that real understanding came from rebuilding the universe in your own mind. Behind the scenes, the Feynman lectures on physics were part of an ambitious project by Caltech to redesign its physics curriculum. Feynman was reluctant at first. He didn't believe that lectures could be recorded or written in a way that truly captured the excitement of discovery. But once he began, he gave everything he had. Over the course of 2 years, he delivered a series of lectures covering nearly every major field of physics, from classical mechanics to quantum theory, from thermodynamics to electromagnetism, even venturing into the mysterious world of gravitation. His goal was simple but monumental: to teach physics as an interconnected whole, as a living organism rather than a pile of disjointed facts. The students who attended quickly realized they were part of something historic. Many of them struggled to keep up. Feynman's ideas moved fast, leaping from concept to concept with breathtaking speed. Yet even when they didn't fully understand every detail, they felt inspired. The experience of listening to him was like watching someone lift the veil from nature itself. The lectures were later transcribed and published, becoming what are now known as the Feynman Lectures on Physics, a monumental 3-volume set that has since educated millions of readers across the globe. Even today, they remain one of the most celebrated physics texts ever written, not because they are easy, but because they are alive. Feynman's teaching style in these lectures was unlike anything that had come before. He refused to follow the rigid patterns of traditional education. Instead of starting with formulas, he started with curiosity. Instead of saying, "This is the law," he would ask, "Why does this law make sense?" He turned physics into a story of relationships, how one law connected to another, how a principle discovered centuries ago echoed through modern discoveries. When he talked about Newton, he did so with admiration, but also with a playful critical eye, showing that even great minds make mistakes. When he discussed quantum theory, he spoke of its mystery with a kind of reverent humor, acknowledging that even physicists did not fully grasp its implications. Through this honesty, he made science feel human. The lectures became a mirror of Feynman's mind, brilliant, unpredictable, and deeply personal. He did not hide his excitement when describing a beautiful equation, nor did he mask his frustration when faced with unsolved mysteries. His joy was contagious. Students remember moments when he would break into a grin, clap his hands, and exclaim, "Isn't that wonderful?" at the end of a derivation. To him, physics was not just a subject, it was art. The universe, he believed, was the greatest piece of art ever created, and understanding its laws was the ultimate form of appreciation. There was something cinematic in the way he unfolded his lectures. One could imagine the camera zooming in on Feynman as he drew spirals on the chalkboard, explaining the movement of particles. Then the camera would pan out to reveal a sea of faces, students completely absorbed, pens frozen mid-note, eyes wide with realization. The narrator's voice would echo softly, "In this room, the universe is being rewritten, not with equations alone, but with imagination." That was the essence of the Feynman Lectures on Physics, a performance of intellect and emotion, logic and wonder. Even outside Caltech, the influence of these lectures began to spread. Scientists around the world praised Feynman's ability to make complex ideas feel simple, not because he watered them down, but because he illuminated their beauty. The published volumes became a treasure for generations of learners, from university students to self-taught dreamers. Some read them for the equations, others read them for the joy of seeing how a mind like Feynman's thought. The language of the books, much like the man himself, was honest and unpretentious. There was no attempt to sound grand or overly technical. Instead, each line carried a conversational warmth, as if he were sitting next to you, explaining the universe over a cup of coffee. At the core of these lectures was Feynman's conviction that physics should never be separated from curiosity. He wanted his readers to ask questions, to challenge assumptions, to doubt and re-examine everything. The lectures were not meant to be memorized, they were meant to be lived. Every chapter was an invitation to think. Every example was a door leading deeper into the heart of reality. Even today, teachers find inspiration in Feynman's approach, not in his specific methods, but in his philosophy, that the goal of education is not to produce answers, but to inspire more questions. In one of his most memorable lectures, Feynman described the universe as a grand game played by the gods, a game whose rules we are slowly learning. One may not yet know all the rules, he said, but we can still play. That metaphor became the soul of his teaching style. He taught his students not just to solve problems, but to play with them, to experiment, to imagine, to treat science as a joyful pursuit rather than a duty. And in doing so, he turned what many saw as a dry subject into something thrilling. The creation of the Feynman Lectures on Physics was not just an academic milestone, it was a cultural one. It represented a new era in science communication, an age where even the most advanced concepts could be understood by anyone willing to think deeply and feel genuinely curious. It broke the barrier between expert and novice, between the scientist and the layperson. Feynman showed that great science could be explained in simple, clear, and human terms. And that act of translation, of turning complexity into clarity, became one of the greatest gifts he left behind. There is a scene often imagined by those who read about Feynman, a quiet lecture hall, after class has ended. The chalkboard is covered with scribbles of equations, diagrams, and arrows pointing in every direction. The air still hums with the energy of the ideas that have just been shared. Somewhere, faintly, one can hear Feynman's voice echoing, vibrant and alive, saying, "Everything is interesting if you look deep enough." That voice, captured in those lectures, still speaks to every generation of learners. It reminds them that the universe is not a mystery to be feared, but a playground to be explored. And perhaps that is why the Feynman Lectures on Physics remain timeless. They are not just about physics. They are about a way of thinking, a way of feeling, a way of being curious. They teach not only the laws of nature, but also the joy of discovery. Through those 3 volumes, Richard Feynman's voice continues to echo across time, calling out to all who wish to understand, "Come, look closer. This world is more beautiful than you think." As the days passed and Richard Feynman's lectures continued, it became clear to everyone who attended that they were witnessing something more than a course. They were part of a movement that would redefine how science was taught for generations. In every word, in every equation he wrote on the board, there was a pulse of excitement, as if the very act of understanding nature was an adventure waiting to unfold. Students spoke about the lectures in hushed, reverent tones. Even seasoned professors would slip quietly into the back rows just to listen. What made these sessions remarkable was not merely the content, though it was vast and deep, but the way Feynman breathed life into it. The Feynman Lectures on Physics became a bridge between pure intellect and pure imagination. Feynman believed that physics was not a set of static facts, but a dynamic process of exploration. In his lectures, he stripped away the intimidating facade of complexity and revealed the underlying simplicity of the universe. He often began with a simple question, one that seemed almost childlike, and from that question unfolded a tapestry of connections that spanned the laws of motion, the structure of matter, and the patterns of light. His words carried the rhythm of discovery. When he explained a principle, he made it feel like it was being discovered in that very moment, as if the world had been waiting for someone curious enough to notice. His method was unconventional. He rarely followed the rigid path laid out in textbooks. Instead, he followed the flow of curiosity. One moment, he might be describing the energy stored in a spring. The next, he would be talking about how the stars themselves are engines of energy. His voice could shift from playful humor to deep philosophical insight within seconds. He often paused mid-lecture, eyes half closed, as if visualizing the particles dancing before him, then suddenly burst into animation again, filling the room with laughter and light. His lectures were not performances of ego. They were celebrations of understanding. What made the Feynman lectures truly revolutionary was how they blurred the boundary between learning and living. Feynman's explanations didn't just tell you how things worked, they showed you why it mattered. When he talked about the movement of planets, you could almost see them gliding silently through space. When he discussed the random motion of atoms, you could imagine the invisible chaos within every breath of air. He used metaphors, analogies, and vivid imagery to translate abstract physics into human experience. Nature, he would say, uses only the longest threads to weave her patterns, so that each small piece of her fabric reveals the organization of the entire tapestry. Those words, though poetic, held a deeper truth, that every phenomenon, no matter how small, was connected to the vast design of the universe. The lectures also carried a subtle challenge. Feynman pushed his audience to think for themselves. He warned them never to accept authority blindly, not even his own. "You must not fool yourself," he often said, "and you are the easiest person to fool." This line became a cornerstone of his philosophy, echoed in every page of the lectures. He taught that science was not about believing, but about questioning. It was about the courage to admit ignorance, the patience to seek understanding, and the joy of finally seeing something clearly. Through his tone and his storytelling, he made doubt feel like an essential part of knowledge, not a weakness. For many students, these lectures were life-changing. They entered the hall expecting to learn formulas. They left with a new way of seeing reality. Feynman's enthusiasm awakened in them a sense of purpose. That science was not just for solving problems, but for enriching life itself. He gave them permission to wonder, to play, to ask foolish questions. He made them believe that curiosity was sacred. It is said that after one of his lectures, a student approached him and said, "Professor Feynman, you make physics sound so simple that it feels like magic." Feynman smiled and replied, "It is magic, until you understand it. And once you understand it, it becomes even more magical." That was his gift, turning understanding into enchantment. When the Feynman lectures on physics were eventually published, they became more than just textbooks. They were like a preserved record of a living mind, a symphony of thought captured in words and diagrams. Reading them, one could still hear the echo of his laughter, the rhythm of his chalk against the board, the moments of silence when he let an idea settle before moving forward. The volumes covered everything, from the mechanics of motion to the beauty of quantum theory, from the simplicity of a falling apple to the complexities of the atom. Yet beneath the technical brilliance lay a deeper current, the belief that the world is knowable, and that understanding it is one of humanity's greatest joys. Decades later, these lectures remain unmatched in their ability to inspire. Professors still assign them, but more importantly, dreamers still read them. They have reached far beyond Caltech, into the hands of artists, engineers, writers, and anyone who ever looked at the stars and asked why. Feynman's voice transcends time, speaking to each reader as if personally inviting them to see the universe through his eyes. In a world increasingly filled with noise and distraction, his clarity cuts through like sunlight through mist. He reminds us that beauty lies not in mystery alone, but in the act of uncovering it. There is an image that perfectly captures the spirit of the Feynman lectures on physics: a classroom bathed in soft morning light, chalk dust suspended in the air like tiny stars, and at the front, Feynman, sleeves rolled up, his face animated with joy as he explains the structure of the atom. Behind him, the blackboard glows with equations, not as barriers, but as windows. The students lean forward, captivated not by the symbols themselves, but by the story those symbols tell. In that moment, science feels alive, vibrant, and profoundly human. Feynman often said that if he could pass on one thing, it would be the pleasure of finding things out. The Feynman lectures on physics are, in essence, an invitation to that pleasure. They show that knowledge is not something to be memorized but experienced, to be felt in the fingertips of curiosity and the heartbeat of discovery. His approach to teaching physics has since inspired countless educators to prioritize understanding over repetition, creativity over conformity. Through his example, he reminded the world that teaching is not the transmission of information, but the ignition of wonder. To this day, when new students open the red-bound volumes of the lectures, they are stepping into a conversation that began decades ago. One that still speaks with freshness and clarity. Every line carries the same spark that once lit the lecture hall at Caltech. Every diagram holds the same spirit of play that defined Feynman's life. And every idea, no matter how technical, whispers the same message, that science is a human adventure, a story written in equations and curiosity, waiting to be rediscovered by each new generation. Feynman did not intend to create a monument to himself, yet, in his effort to make others understand, he built something timeless. The Feynman lectures on physics stand as a testament to what happens when passion meets clarity, when intelligence meets imagination. They are not relics of the past, but living works, still teaching, still inspiring, still challenging us to see the world as Feynman did, full of mystery, but never beyond understanding. And perhaps that is where the true genius of Feynman's lectures lies, not in the depth of the physics they contain, but in the depth of feeling they evoke. They remind us that learning is an act of love for truth, love for beauty, love for the endless dance of discovery. Through those pages, through those chalk-drawn diagrams, Feynman continues to speak, reminding us that the universe is not a puzzle to be solved once and for all, but a story that we are privileged to keep exploring. Even now, his voice echoes, gentle, amused, and full of life. If you want to find out something new, look at it carefully and think hard. Nature has answers, if you have the patience to listen. And with that, the lecture never truly ends. It continues, in every question we ask, in every discovery we make, and in every spark of curiosity that his words still ignite across the world. Richard Feynman's storytelling approach to science was not just a method of explanation. It was an art form. When Feynman spoke, it felt as if the universe itself was speaking through him, telling its own story in a voice filled with humor, wonder, and simplicity. He understood that science was not only about facts and formulas, it was about the human experience of discovery. He brought that emotional connection into his talks, transforming even the most abstract theories into living, breathing narratives that could capture anyone's imagination. In classrooms, on television, or in casual conversation, Feynman had a way of wrapping deep ideas in tales of curiosity and play, making listeners feel like they were sitting beside him at a café rather than attending a physics lecture. His stories often began with something ordinary, a spinning plate, a wobbly chair, or the flicker of light, and before you knew it, you were deep inside the laws of motion or the mysteries of quantum behavior. This seamless transition from the familiar to the extraordinary was his genius. He didn't just describe science, he made it come alive. His words painted images, his pauses built suspense, and his laughter made the most difficult concepts feel like moments of joy. It was through storytelling that Feynman turned science into a shared human adventure, breaking the walls that separated the scientist from the ordinary person. Feynman believed that storytelling was not about entertainment, it was about connection. When he spoke of his time working on the Manhattan Project, or of the beauty of a flower seen through a scientist's eyes, he invited his audience to feel what he felt: awe. He once explained that knowing more about the structure of a flower, the way its colors reflected light, the cellular life within its petals, did not make it less beautiful, it made it infinitely more so. That was Feynman's philosophy, that understanding adds depth to wonder. His stories carried this message effortlessly, showing that curiosity is not the enemy of beauty but its greatest companion. In many ways, Feynman's storytelling style broke the stereotype of the distant, emotionless scientist. He was vibrant, spontaneous, and full of life. He could shift from a technical discussion on quantum electrodynamics to a story about fixing radios or cracking safes with the same sparkle in his eyes. His audiences, whether students or laypeople, felt included in his journey. They weren't being lectured to. They were being invited to play along, to explore, to question, and to laugh. Through his stories, he reminded everyone that science is a human story, filled with mistakes, triumphs, and endless curiosity. Even today, Feynman's recorded lectures and interviews continue to inspire new generations. His voice carries the rhythm of wonder, the melody of understanding, and the heartbeat of curiosity. Every story he told, whether about atoms, magnets, or the mystery of life itself, became a bridge between knowledge and imagination. And that is why Richard Feynman's storytelling remains timeless, because it wasn't just about explaining the world. It was about feeling it. Richard Feynman believed that learning should never be a burden, it should be a journey filled with curiosity, experimentation, and play. To him, science was not a set of rigid rules or memorized facts, but an endless playground of ideas where imagination had no limits. He often said that the best way to understand something was to play with it, to explore it from different angles, to make mistakes, and to have fun in the process. This belief shaped his approach to both teaching and discovery. Feynman's laboratories were not silent rooms of equations, but spaces of laughter, tinkering, and wonder. He treated the universe like a puzzle, not a problem to solve, but a mystery to enjoy. From a young age, Feynman's curiosity was fueled by hands-on exploration. He loved taking apart radios just to see how they worked and rebuilding them in new ways. That playful approach never left him, even when he became one of the world's greatest physicists. While many scientists followed strict formal methods, Feynman followed intuition, imagination, and the thrill of discovery. He believed that genuine understanding came only when one could see the truth behind the equations, when one could visualize how nature behaved. For Feynman, learning was not about memorizing formulas, it was about finding joy in the patterns of reality. In his lectures, he encouraged students to experiment freely, to question every assumption, and to never be afraid of being wrong. He reminded them that mistakes are not failures, they are part of the learning process. When he didn't understand something, he would start from the basics, rebuild the concept step by step, and play with it until it made sense. This playful persistence became one of his trademarks. He once said that if he could not explain a topic in simple terms, it meant he didn't understand it well enough. That humility and curiosity kept him grounded and endlessly creative. Feynman's way of learning through play extended far beyond physics. He taught himself to draw, to play the bongo drums, and even to crack safes, not because he had to, but because it was fun to figure things out. He saw learning as a natural human instinct, a game the universe invited us to play. Each new challenge, whether artistic, mechanical, or mathematical, was another chance to explore how things worked. That playful mindset made his scientific discoveries more intuitive, his explanations more relatable, and his personality more inspiring. When people listened to Feynman speak, they didn't just learn science, they learned how to think like a scientist. He taught that curiosity and play are not distractions, they are the very heart of discovery. He reminded the world that even the most serious pursuits should be filled with joy. His laughter in lectures, his spontaneous experiments, and his delight in every how moment showed that the spirit of play is what keeps science alive. Richard Feynman turned learning into an act of wonder, proving that the path to understanding begins not with fear or formality, but with curiosity, courage, and a playful heart. Richard Feynman's charisma and humor were as essential to his scientific influence as his intellect. When he spoke, it was as if the air itself became lighter, charged with the energy of discovery and laughter. He had a remarkable gift, the ability to make people feel the joy of science. Whether he was addressing a classroom of students or an audience of thousands, Feynman's presence was magnetic. His expressions, his quick wit, and his lively gestures made the most complex topics seem effortless. He turned lectures into performances and ideas into living experiences. For him, humor was not a distraction from science, it was part of it, a way to keep curiosity alive and to remind everyone that learning should never lose its sense of play. Feynman's laughter was famous, loud, contagious, and sincere. It came from the same place as his love for discovery. When he found a new idea or solved a tough problem, he laughed as if he had just uncovered a great secret of the universe. That laughter symbolized his belief that knowledge and joy were inseparable. He didn't see science as a solemn temple of serious thinkers, but as a playground where everyone could join in. His humor was often self-deprecating. He made fun of his own mistakes, his confusions, and even the complexities of physics itself. This humility broke the wall between the expert and the learner. His students didn't feel intimidated, they felt encouraged. He often told stories filled with mischief and cleverness, from fixing radios as a boy to cracking safes at Los Alamos during the atomic bomb project. These tales were not just entertaining anecdotes, they revealed his philosophy that curiosity, boldness, and humor can open any locked door. Even when discussing profound subjects like quantum electrodynamics, he used everyday examples and playful analogies. He compared particles to dancers and waves to ripples of light, turning mathematical abstraction into vivid imagery. His sense of humor made difficult truths easier to grasp because it brought emotion into logic and warmth into intellect. Feynman's charisma wasn't forced, it came from his honesty and passion. He spoke with the same excitement whether he was explaining the beauty of a flower or the laws of nature. Audiences felt that he wasn't performing to impress. He was genuinely sharing his love for discovery. His voice carried the rhythm of someone who was deeply in love with learning, and his humor reminded everyone that curiosity is not just a duty of the mind, but a joy of the soul. Even when he tackled serious moral questions, such as the responsibility of scientists in the atomic age, he spoke with sincerity and lightness, balancing seriousness with human warmth. Through his charisma and humor, Feynman made science human again. He showed that a great mind can also have a playful heart. His laughter still echoes in classrooms and documentaries, inspiring people to see learning not as work, but as a wonderful game played with the universe itself. In every smile he sparked and every spark of curiosity he lit, Richard Feynman reminded the world that the greatest discoveries begin with wonder and a good sense of humor. Richard Feynman's legacy in making science accessible to all is one of the most remarkable contributions of the 20th century. He transformed the way people looked at knowledge, breaking the walls between scientists and ordinary individuals. For Feynman, science was never meant to be locked away in laboratories or buried under complex equations. It was a language of wonder that everyone could learn to speak. His mission was simple but revolutionary, to show that understanding the world was not reserved for geniuses, but for anyone who was curious enough to ask, why? Through his teaching, his books, and his public talks, Feynman opened the door of science wide, inviting everyone in with a smile and a spark of excitement. He believed that learning was not about memorization or authority. It was about the thrill of discovering how things work. Feynman often said that if you couldn't explain something simply, you didn't understand it well enough. That philosophy guided everything he did. When he taught physics, he avoided hiding behind technical jargon. Instead, he spoke through examples drawn from everyday life. Spinning plates, wobbling wheels, or the flicker of sunlight. He made invisible forces visible through imagination, and his clarity inspired people far beyond the world of academia. His lectures were not just for students, but for anyone who had ever looked at the night sky and wondered. Feynman's books, like Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, and the pleasure of finding things out, became global sensations. They were filled not only with scientific insight, but with stories of curiosity, laughter, and the human side of discovery. Through them, he gave readers permission to think freely, to challenge ideas, and to find joy in understanding. He made scientists relatable, not distant figures in white coats, but real people with humor, creativity, and passion. His legacy changed the image of science from something cold and complex to something alive and deeply human. Beyond his writings, Feynman's influence spread through the power of modern media. His voice, his interviews, and his recorded lectures continue to reach millions around the world. People who never studied physics find themselves captivated by his enthusiasm. His words transcend generations, proving that curiosity has no age limit. Even in the digital era, his ideas remain timeless, reminding us that science is not about memorizing facts, it's about feeling the wonder of existence itself. Feynman's impact also reshaped education. His methods inspired new ways of teaching, focusing on understanding rather than repetition. He showed that the best teachers are not those who give answers, but those who ignite questions. His approach encouraged young minds to see beauty in logic, art in equations, and poetry in nature. He believed that every child is born a scientist, naturally curious, eager to explore, and unafraid to make mistakes. His life became a testament to that belief, and his teaching style continues to inspire educators everywhere to bring curiosity back into classrooms. Today, Richard Feynman's legacy stands as a bridge between science and society. He made knowledge a shared experience, not a privilege. He reminded humanity that the pursuit of understanding is not just for the few, but for everyone who looks at the world with wonder. In every curious student, every inspired teacher, and every person who feels awe at the mysteries of the universe, a piece of Feynman's spirit lives on. He turned science into a story of joy, freedom, and discovery, a story that belongs to all of us.